Welcome to the Moffitt Method Podcast, where longtime strength and conditioning coach Tommy Moffitt explores everything from the art of coaching, improving performance, sports nutrition, and mental training. Now, welcome your host, Coach Tommy Moffitt.
Welcome to the Moffitt Method Podcast, and I am your host, Tommy Moffitt. If you're listening for the first time, please take a moment to subscribe to the podcast and share it with your friends. For more information about the Moffitt Method speed, strength, and conditioning programs, please visit our website, themoffittmethod.fit, or email us at info@themoffittmethod.fit. Our outstanding guest today is Coach Pat Basil. Coach is the owner of Pat Basil Strength, an online resource for coaching and those looking to get bigger, faster, and stronger. Prior to Basil Strength, he was the head strength and conditioning coach at Hamilton College. Prior to Hamilton, he was an assistant strength and conditioning coach at Bryant University, where he worked with field hockey, men's soccer, men's and women's swimming and diving, and the men's golf teams. He assisted with the football, baseball, basketball, and men's and women's lacrosse teams. He also served as the head strength and conditioning coach and assistant football coach at SUNY Maritime College, as well as strength and conditioning internships at the University of Connecticut and Bryant University. Coach is also a certified strength and conditioning specialist by the National Strength and Conditioning Association and USA Weightlifting. Coach has his bachelor's degree in applied psychology from Bryant University and his master's in exercise science with a concentration in sports performance training from Concordia University in Chicago. Welcome to the podcast, Coach.
Thanks for having me. Fired up to be here.
Good deal, man. It's going to be exciting, and I'm looking forward to it. So let's get started right off the bat. How did you get started in the field of strength and conditioning?
So it's always something I was kind of drawn to. So I started working out. I mean, my dad was a college football player, and he was, hey, you got to start working out if you want to play football. So we were, as early as sixth grade, we had these like spindle weight dumbbells doing curls. And so, I mean, as early as sixth grade, we were doing that, not consistently or anything. But a new gym opened up about a mile from my house. And my brother's a year and a half older than me. He got interested in working out earlier on. So he was, I don't know, early high school. About that time, you start picking it up. And he wanted to get a gym membership. And because he did it, I wanted to do it. So we started going in. So that was me, 7th, 8th grade is when I started lifting seriously. Just because there was a gym there and access. And there you go. So because of that, or even into high school, I was always the strongest kid around because I started so early. And I saw the benefit it gave me and how much it helped me on the field. And I'm an undersized defensive lineman. So I was at my peak in high school, 5'10", 250 and change maybe. Yeah. And I would not have lasted on the interior if I wasn't the strongest guy like in the county. So I was able to hold my own and play well and ended up going Division I FCS. And that would not have happened if I wasn't training for 5-6 years at that point. So I saw the benefit it gave me. I knew how much it made a difference. And I knew it was just something I wanted to continue with. So it was just a natural path. When I found out what a strength coach was, I said, that sounds like everything I want to do for a living. So there it is.
Awesome. So when you coached in college, did you coach the defensive line also?
I didn't. My first job, I was actually a wide receivers coach. It's just what the position they needed. So it was strength and conditioning and then wide receivers. Yeah. So I helped out with special teams because I was a special teams guy too. I was a long snapper all 4 years, but a whole new position. You know, I only played 1 year on offense in college. And then I just went the strength route. So I could have definitely seen myself going that way, but no, it was all strength from there.
Yeah, same with me. So why did you leave collegiate coaching to go out on your own and start Basil Strength?
So the business was something I had been building on the side for when I left about 2.5 years. So I started creating content on Twitter specifically in that lockdown time, 2020, because we all had time, right? So that's what I started doing. So originally it was to start building a more global network, I guess, across the country, because my wife is an academic, or at the time she was. So she was a year out from finishing her PhD. And academia is like coaching. You don't get to choose where you go. You got to go where the jobs are. So they actually hire a year in advance. So she was on the job market a year in advance. So I said, okay, let me get my name out there just to help myself get a job when the time comes, if the time comes. So when I started tweeting, I started sharing the stuff I do every day at the small school level, and it seemed to resonate with people. And people started asking me questions, and I feel like I had this knack to explain programming well. And I felt like our field just loves to overcomplicate things, and there are people out there that just need the basics so well, and like get to the other stuff later on. So I said I had this idea I can put this manual together to teach them how to do it, because I feel like that was lacking. That became my first paid product. So that's when my business started. Was I wrote this thing, made a few templates, put it out on Twitter, says, hey, I have this thing. Didn't expect anything of it. I sold a bunch on the first day, and like the rest was history. When I realized I could make money on the internet, that was history. So it was just something I pursued. What's that?
Yeah. I said that's freedom.
Absolutely. And it was just something I continued to build, and it became a hobby, really. You know, we all talk, what's your hobby in strength and conditioning? Well, mine was making money and learning about business.
Yeah. All right. So,
yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and then it just grew from there. Found more problems, gave more solutions, and there you go.
Yeah. All right. So from the time you started until, you felt comfortable that you could do this for a career, how long was that time before you started, like making money?
Mm-hmm. So you start making money immediately. So, well, I don't want to say that. The day I launched a product, I started making money. To get to the point where I felt comfortable leaving my job was never. I never felt comfortable, and you never will. This is something you talk to anybody who makes a jump into entrepreneurship. There's never a perfect time. You are always going to come up with a reason. I'd like to see it be consistent for a year, 2 years. I'd like to see make this amount of money, this, that, and the other thing. And it's fear talking is what it is. We will always come up with a reason why now is not a good time. But it's just the way it went. But at that point, I was about 2.5 years into it. So my first year, it was a nice side hustle. I made a good side income. My second full year, so all of 2022, I made about as much as I did at my job. So that was when I was like, okay, I've matched my income. If I need to go, I could. So that, I guess, like that second year is when the seed planted. Like, if I need to go, I can. Had no intention of going, but if I needed to, I could. Then continued to grow going into last spring. And I left because my job went downhill fast. I had an assistant position I hadn't been able to fill in 2 years. I was stretched thin. So now for reference, that's 29 teams, 650 kids by myself, no help. Yeah. I developed a system to make it work, and we did a great job with it. That's what I talk about now. But spread too thin, handful of people couldn't be pleased, and I said, you know what, I don't need to do this anymore. And like the key word you said before is freedom. I don't need to listen to this. I don't need to deal with it. I have another option. And I said, adios, and jumped.
Those hiring delays, was that because of, the post-COVID hangover, or was it just finances within the athletic department? What was the cause of that? Did they ever say?
It was a part-time position, and we're in the middle of upstate New York. So we're in farm country. Nobody wants to move upstate New York for a part-time job. We tried. I actually met a guy that got offered that job like 10 years ago, and the job hasn't changed since. So I was full-time. They got that position created when I first got hired. But that assistant position has not changed, and we've tried for years to get it. Hey, we can't hire. We need to make this full-time. It never did. Sure enough, the applicant pool told us no thanks, and nothing ever came of it. So we just couldn't. Nobody wanted the job. That's all it was.
Tough. Okay, so you've been around this business, and I know that you meet a lot of young coaches, especially now. So, what are some of the necessary attributes that a coach has to have in order to be successful on the field, if they're a position coach or a sport coach, and in the weight room?
So this goes back to like I've had to hire a couple of young coaches, and the advice I give them is one, basic professionalism. I think that gets overlooked. Show up on time. If you have a responsibility, make sure it
Yeah,
gets done. The head coach should not have to be on you to get your film cut ups in. Get your manual done. Make your recruiting calls. Just if you are given a responsibility, do it.
yeah,
And as a head coach, having overseen assistants, when you have assistants that can just do what they're supposed to do and you don't have to worry, it's so freeing. So just basic professional, be there on time, approach your work. Um, but then being able to teach the basic exercises or like a technique if you're a position coach and be a self starter, that's absolutely huge. And then if you're a strength coach, you got to be able to speak up and lead the room. If you're timid or you're going to have your hands in your pockets, you're just not going to make it. We call that like it. You got to have it. And when young coaches have it, I can teach you how to teach exercise. I can teach you how to program. I can teach you physiology. But if you're afraid to stand in front of the room and just lead and not be like a hype man or anything, that's great. But just being able to lead and give directions. If you're afraid to do that or you can't do that, you're in the wrong field or
yeah,
the wrong setting anyway.
yeah.
So those are the two key things I think you got to have as a young coach.
Yeah, you got to have that presence, that
Mm-hmm.
captivating presence. And I've been around coaches that were not rah rah guys, and they had those guys' attention. And then I've been around rah rah guys that had their attention. It's just, it's a personality trait that some people have and some people don't. And I think you can get better at it. When I first started coaching, I didn't know what I was doing, and I was trying too hard. And a friend of mine on the staff says, "Hey, man, you can't coach like anybody else. You got to be yourself and just keep working at it." And sure enough, before long, I got better and better. But it took a while. I remember I'd probably been on the job. I was a high school coach. That was my first job. And I told where I asked the head coach once if he'd come by and check out the weight room, and watch what we're doing. And he looked at me and he says, "Coach, if I have to do that, I don't need you." And I was like, "Oh, okay." And he never stepped foot. I was there for 6 years, and I don't think he ever stepped foot in the weight room those 6 years because he hired me to do a job and expected me to be able to do it. So, when working with coaches and teams remotely, what's one of the biggest obstacles that you encounter right now?
So the biggest adjustment for me was more so the setting. So most of the teams I work with are in the high school level, and it's a lot of PE classes. So typically at the college, you have you train teams individually. They're football off season, basketball in season. It's pretty set. So at the PE level, most of them, it's going to be usually a mixed group of both off season and in season, and then you're going to get some non-athletes thrown in there as well, which they can train. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah,
If they join the baseball team, guess what? They're an athlete now. So it's the mixed groups, and not so much handling that. It's how do we adjust the program to make it fit. And that was a pretty easy transition because the answers are. You know what an in-season program looked like. You know what an off-season program should look like. And just making the program fit. Okay, how do we run the same thing at the same program adjusted at the same time? And that took a little bit of adjustment, but you know the answers and you're able to put it together, if you've done it. So it was the adjustment of, I guess, the application of it in that setting. And then you're not there actively coaching. So you either have to go off video or at a certain point take their word that it's going well. And that's something I do in the qualification process when I first start talking to coaches. Our first discovery call of how the program is going to work and how the service works. Have you coached before? That's something I'm clear about. This is not something I send to you and you read the newspaper in the corner. You have to be coaching. You have to be familiar with what's going on in there, either having trained yourself. Usually it's coaches and teachers that have PE class and they've been doing it for some time. They just don't know how to put the program together optimally. And I give them all the how-to videos and all my coaching videos. They have all the information they need, but that's one thing I make sure they have is, do you have some coaching experience going in? Because if they don't, it's going to be tough. Or the program just has to be super basic, goblet squats, floor presses, things that are more or less idiot-proof. And I know there's no idiot-proof, but it just needs to be adjusted. So that's how I work with that.
All right. So when you're talking to a school or a coach or a client, without video, have you ever come across people that that aren't bought in and doing what's needed? Like, how do you handle that?
Not really. That's on their end. Let's say you have a PE class and there's 5 kids that just aren't interested.
Yeah.
That's on them. I'm happy to help if they, how do I reach these kids? It hasn't really come up. My advice to them is, make sure they're executing safely. But if the effort isn't there, put the effort into the kids who are actually trying, but make sure they're safe. But that's on their end. That's one of the great things about being remote is I don't have to worry about that.
Yeah. Amen. All right. So I'm sure that many of our listeners know who you are and they're familiar with your social media account. But for those who are not, can you describe your training philosophy for speed, strength, and conditioning? The basics.
For sure. I'm all about efficiency, and my whole philosophy is get in, get trained, and get out. Because the optimal dose that I found is much less than people think it is. It's my workouts take about 35 to 40 minutes in season. We're maybe in and out in 25, 30. Total body, 2-3 days a week. And you might think that's a small amount or that's minimal training. It's really not. It's just most are so used to overdoing it. And I did for so long that doing less, it seems minimal, but in reality, it's not. It's optimal. So I'm not trying to do as little as possible. My whole philosophy is do enough to get the job done and then stop, which is just common sense to me. We're just so used to doing way too much. So enough to get the job done seems minimal. But that's what I'm about. Efficiency, get the job done, and then go home. That's it.
Yeah, Coach Johnny Parker told me one time that more people have gotten better in spite of him than because of him. Because, it's always, especially a long time ago, it was about how much you could do, not how well you did all the time. Can you explain, and you've talked about this a couple of times in your post, can you explain why the order of the exercises, and I know this may sound very basic, but because some people just don't understand. So can you explain the order of the exercises and why it's important and how you go about setting up a training day?
Sure. And I will say there's one thing I've learned doing this. It's never too basic. It's never too basic. So listener, if you're out there and that's a question you have, it's a fantastic question because I promise you it's somebody out there needs to know. So what you start with, whether you're doing field work on top of your strength training in the weight room or not, you want to prioritize your highest output stuff first. So if you're doing your sprint and speed training, that's going to be first, followed by your jumps, your plyometrics, your medicine ball throws. You could reverse that order if you need to logistically. And the reason you want to do that high output, powerful stuff first is so you can put maximal effort and what we call intent into it. And the reason being, the training effect that happens from those things gets blunted if you're tired, because if you're tired, you can't put maximal effort and force into those things. You can't jump as high, you can't sprint as fast, you can't throw as hard. So you want to be fresh so you can do those things optimally and really put the most intent and effort into it, and that will give you the greatest training effect on the other side. Because the key point of any training is the training effect, or the adaptation is the fancy word we call. So it's not about the workouts, it's not about the sets and reps, it's about the adaptation and then how do we make it happen. So doing those things first when you're fresh gives you the best adaptation, the best results. Now, because we're going to do those things at a lower volume so we don't get tired, you're not going to be super tired after doing your sprints, your jumps and plyometrics, things like that. So the next thing you want to do is your heaviest major lift. And you do that next because you're not going to be super tired from the power stuff, because that's not the idea. So you're still fresh enough to execute your most technical lifts at a very high and safe level. So this is the next best point to put your heaviest lift, because you're still going to be fresh after your power work. You're going to get a little bit of a potentiation effect, or that activation or wake up. Whether you like that phrase or not, there's something to it. So you can execute those next while you're fresh. So it's going to be your sprint, your speed, your power stuff, and then your main lift, your heaviest thing, your squat, maybe your bench press if that's your main lift of the day. Then next after that, you're going to be in a little fatigue state, but not terrible. You're probably anywhere from 15 to 30 minutes into your workout, depending on what you've done before. You're still able to execute a heavier lift at a pretty high level. And at a certain point, it's just the best remaining spot to put it. So this would be what I call your main assistance lift. So it's the next heaviest compound lift that's going to complement the major lift. So if you're, say it's a lower body day, your main lift may be a squat, a back squat. The one that will complement that might be an RDL or a glute ham raise or a Nordic or something like that. So that's the next best place to put that. And then after that, you're going to be pretty tired. You're not going to have a ton of juice left in the tank. So that's when you would do your assistance, your accessory work, your core work, your rows, your corrective stuff, because those can be done safely and effectively in a fatigue state. So that's your exercise order. Speed and power stuff first, heaviest main lift second. If you have a secondary heavy assistance lift, you do that third, and then your assistance work last. Sometimes those last two kind of blend in together, and that's okay. But that's an ideal exercise order, and that's why.
Yeah. Great job, man. That fires me up because, a lot of times you look at someone's program and, that order, because that's how I was always taught, that way. And so sometimes you look at someone's program and you kind of wonder why the order of the exercises. And without knowing, you don't know the context that the program was written. But the way you just explained it was always the way I was taught. And so I appreciate that. Very good job. Very good job.
Thank you.
All right. So, yeah. So, next question. All right. You have two athletes, same age, similar training age, and could be identical sports. Would you train them differently if one were a male and the other a female?
So the base program would be pretty much the same, and it's not about male or female. It's what do they execute well, what do they need? Because then it's not about male or female or age or sport. It's what does the individual in front of you need and what can they do well. So it could, for example, if you're doing a more basic thing like a front squat, if they can both front squat well, you just need to adjust the weight on the bar for what they can handle. Some other things come into play. For example, some guys are going to be stronger at certain movements than women are. For example, chin-ups. Guys are going to be able to do chin-ups easier. So it's not that the female athlete couldn't do it. Your reps just may be lower. For the male, you might put 3 sets of 8. The girl, you might put like 3 sets of 2 or something like that, or accumulate 10 total reps, or not. We've all seen some ridiculously strong. I was going to say freakishly strong girls. And I used to, because I worked with men's and women's hockey, and if you've ever worked with hockey, some of those girls are just insanely strong. And I would love it when some of the girls are stronger than the guys, because then I could chirp the guys. It was awesome. But we had girls that would outlift guys, some of the guys that with a lower training age, or some of the guys that didn't care. So, girls do a little less. Well, not in this case. There's girls that were lifting, benching more than some of the guys. So it's that wasn't certainly that wasn't common, but it's out there. So it's not about male or female. It's what does the individual need and what can they do, and don't hold them back. If they can do it, get after it.
When I was at LSU, our beach volleyball team, they're a perennial powerhouse. They're competing for, number one every year. And we had some really, really powerful young women, and they trained a lot of the time. They trained the same time because we had a big weight room, so you'd have two teams in there at the same time. And a football player would say, "Coach, how much weight does she have on the bar?" And I would say, "More than you. Shut up and get the stop watching. She's got more on than you." And so yeah, that's awesome. All right. So this quote here from your Twitter account is the reason that I reached out to you to do this. This is the tweet that piqued my interest. And so from your profile, and I'm going to quote you, it said, "Question I got. What's the most important quality to train when you're working with 13U athletes?" And then you replied, "The answer is technique and movement quality. Hands down, bar none, no discussion." And then you went on to say, "Teach them to master technique early, and the whole world falls into place." Can you explain this response and tell us where that passion for doing things the right way comes from?
Absolutely. So I hope whoever's listening paused and rewound that, because that's absolutely huge. And it comes from, I mean, look, my lifetime PR squat is 650 pounds. I know what it's like to be ridiculously strong. The reason I could squat so darn much, and I was always the strongest guy around, is because I made a point to do it right from day one. It's always something, and sure, I went on to be a strength coach, and I took pride in it. But because the technique was there, the results come. It goes back to training effect. Remember, training is not about sets and reps. It's not about exercise. It's about the adaptation. So the point of all training is to apply the adaptation. In order to get the best adaptation and do it safely, the technique and executing reps properly is going to get you the best result. That's what matters. The cool thing about it is it's also going to be the safest. So you're not trading one for the other, or you're not holding back. The safest way to do it is also the most effective way to do it. It just works out so well like that. Sometimes in life there's trade-offs on things, not in this case. So if you have a kid, and then what's the opposite? What's the alternative? If you're forcing weight on a kid and the technique is crappy, and we're using too heavy of a load, one, they're never going to learn proper technique, but they're going to get hurt, and they know it's bad. They know they're scared that I don't want to do this. And now what are you doing? You're creating a negative association with training. They're afraid of the weight room. They're going to get hurt in the weight room, because they probably will at some point. They don't want to go back to the weight room. How can you build long-term success and build a passion and a care for training if early on it's just negative, negative, negative? And the kid is right to believe that, because they're being set up for failure. So if you teach a kid properly, because any beginner is going to get stronger as long as they execute well, and as long as they keep showing up, they're going to get stronger. And they're going to get those better training results. And when they can get strong enough to handle those loads, it's a compounding interest. They're going to get stronger and more powerful faster and sooner, and continuing so if that technique is there. So if you're early on, if you establish that technique and the movement quality and really executing well early, they will do that their entire life. And I'm not talking about the 4 years in high school, 4 years in college. They'll be lifting until they drop dead one day. So if you have a youth athlete and you teach them right, 60, 70-year lifting career, you set them up for life. So it's ultra important. It's not about just sports performance or a couple of years. It is a lifelong thing that you can seriously set them up with, or do the opposite if you do it wrong. That's why it's so important, and that's why I harp on it so much.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, so when I saw that, that is, that's the reason right there, because that says everything about what really coaching is. And then again, one of my mentors, same guy, Johnny Parker, he always said, "Coach the kids, not the weights." Because, we've all done it before. We get caught up in the big numbers because it's exciting when somebody squats 650 pounds. But there's a process that you have to go through in order to get there, and it's important that you're patient and you do it right. And then you have a staff of people that are trained to do it right also. I don't think that it matters at all how much you know about strength and conditioning. If your staff, the people that are in that room helping you, they got to have the same passion that you have for technique, or you're not going to get the same results. Good deal. All right. So I see a lot of references to cleans in your programming, without any reference to the different starting positions, hang cleans or power cleans. So how do you recommend cleans? And I'm putting cleans in quotation marks because there's, 10 different types or more. So how do you recommend that those be introduced, and how much of the other types of cleans do you program for with your clients?
Sure. So I'll start with I don't want to say the word ditched, but I got rid of cleans from my programming 5 years ago. And I think it's important to understand the context of why, and then how I do use them when I do use them. So I had always done them. I first learned them in college. I've cleaned over 300 pounds. I get it. Look, like I've said, if I wasn't the strongest guy around, I don't survive playing defensive line. So I use them. I was told they're the best. They're the best for football, best for sports, triple extension, the same thing we've all heard, right? So I believe that hook, line, and sinker all throughout my college years. And then when I started coaching, I did it because I did it. I thought it was important. So I taught from obviously football, golf, field hockey, soccer, swimming. We all did it. Every sport did it. And it was something I believed in. And I taught them. I even taught golf how to do what I would call a hang clean, just so I could say I did it. Not because I actually believed it was a great idea. It's like, you know what, if I can teach these guys how to do it, I can teach anybody how to do it. So I did. So that was at my first several stops. Most recently to that point at Bryant at the Division I level, the FCS kind of mid-major. When I took my last job at Hamilton, this was 5 years ago. So Hamilton College, small Division III school. There was no structured strength conditioning program. So it was a startup program from scratch. So when you go into that situation, if there's no structured, you're going to have bench and biceps and a lot of that, but not a lot of quality movement. No hinge pattern, no posterior chain strength, really no technique, period. So when I first got there, and my assistant who I hired came in at the same time. So it's interesting because we both had the same viewpoint. We both had always done cleans because it's important. And we thought they were the best for athletes. So we both came in at the same time. And we said, okay, the movement quality isn't there. The hinge pattern isn't good. The RDL isn't good. Let's hold off for a month, really establish like the base level of movement quality and strength and coordination above all else. And then we'll get to it. Because right now they're not ready for it. Remember, exercises are just tools to apply a stimulus. That's all it is. So we said, you know what? Jumps, throws. We'll start with that. Then we'll get to the cleans with every intention of doing it. So a month goes by, and we notice they're getting stronger. They're getting more explosive. They're jumping on higher boxes. Okay. So I turned to him one day. And I said, you know what? What if we just hold off on the cleans and see what happens? We never went back. We kept getting stronger. We kept getting more powerful. And we just said, what's the point? Our jumps on our measurements and all those things got better like they always did. But the kicker we noticed, we were saving about 15 minutes per lift. Now, if you think logistically, we have 29 teams we have to get through our small Division III weight room. Yeah. To save 15 minutes per session, that if you have 4 sessions, that frees up another hour of time slot. We could get more teams in, more groups in. So for the time, what did we really get from it? We couldn't quantify what you got from it. We took it away and nothing changed. So what did you actually get? I couldn't. The answer is, as far as I can tell, nothing. I did cleans for years and got nothing from it. And that was not my agenda. I didn't set to disprove anything. That's just the clear-cut results. So we didn't do it for that reason. Now, when we do introduce it, like for example, I had a private client who was a high school girls basketball coach who did value cleans. He wanted to do them. I said, sure, whatever, your team, we'll do it. So I don't see anything wrong with it. If you want to do it and the kids can handle it, go for it. I'm all for it. So we did all from the hang because it was just a preference thing. He didn't want them pulling from the ground, and that's okay. And it was easier to do. So when I teach it in person, I start from the hang just because we're gonna be working on the hinge pattern from day one. So we're gonna be doing some kind of RDL. So it's just a more natural groove. And then from an RDL to that first pull, the hang power shrug, just to be able to keep the bar in contact with the legs and get the extension part down, and then work on the catch later on. So I'll probably do like at least 2-3 weeks of just what I would call a hang power shrug, just to get the groove of the first pull into the extension and building some just timing and coordination with it. And then I'll start to introduce a catch. So I'll actually start with, I'm a big fan of drills. And I got this from my mentor, who is a longtime Olympic weightlifter. His name is Craig Buckley, who is actually now another head strength coach in the NESCAC, which is the conference I was in at Colby College. So I actually, if I didn't leave, I would be playing against him in all sports. We just crossed paths in a night career-wise in this conference anyway. So he was a big Olympic lifter, and he had a lot of technique drills that you could build in, almost like pairing with a clean progression you're doing to really harp on that thing. For example, what I would call a tall clean. So I'm frozen up top, and then I sit to my heels and punch under, say, an empty bar. So I would do, 2 tall clean reps, then go in, and then 2 power shrugs. Do that for maybe a week or 2, and then say, okay, we're going to put it all together. 2, like a complex, 2 tall clean plus a hang power clean. So I say, okay, take that tall clean drill where you catch and get under it. Now I want you to go power shrug, then power shrug, and put it all together. And that'll be the first time they put the whole movement together. And I say, it's going to look terrible. Don't worry about it. It's okay. But when they first finally get tall and then get the idea to sit back and get through and under it, then you can just coach up, okay, a little faster, get your elbows through more, don't pull with your arms so much. And then it's just little technique things.
Right.
And then I'll prescribe different drills and different variants to correct what I'm seeing. For example, when I find they first start catching the clean, there's a tendency to short it. They'll forget the first pull, and they'll go right to their knee and try to almost jump and flip. So I said, okay, we need to go back to more hang power shrug to get it. So I'll do, again, like a complex power shrug clean. So it forces them to practice getting the bar to the hip and then putting it on. So I'll actually prescribe variants based on what the technical breakdown I see from the group. And that's how I program. And after about 6 to 8 weeks, we're at a point where most of the group is pretty competent at least putting together a full hang power clean. And then once they get that idea, cleaning from the ground is just being able to set up kind of that deadlift position and understand how to stay tight and push away from the ground. Use your legs to push the ground away. And once you get to the bottom of your knee, it's more or less the same. So that's pretty easy. So I'll start from the top down, because once you master the hang position, pulling from the ground is pretty easy. So if you've deadlifted or trap bar deadlifted at any point in your life, you get the idea of holding tension and pushing away. It's pretty easy. So I know that's a long-winded story of my relationship with cleans. But I will say, I think I noticed the timer here in the corner. I spent 3 minutes discussing an about 6 weeks journey to teach an exercise for what do you get in return? I took it out and nothing changed. So it's this massive undertaking and this massive for zero return on the investment. And it just blows my mind that, like, for years, this was the best thing in the world. And nothing against anybody who doesn't. You want to do it great, but it's just clear as day. It's like a fog was lifted from my eyes when I first got away from them. So it's just clear as day for me, and that's my whole shtick with it.
Yeah, well, a couple things that I think you have to note. And one is a lot of people, they say we're going to do cleans or we're going to do snatches or we're going to do jerks. and then they go right to cleans, snatches, and jerks, and they don't have a progression. And then when they see mistakes, they just keep having their athletes repeat that over and over and over again incorrectly. And that's worse than not doing it,
Hmm.
or, you know, sitting and eating snack bars or something. So uh, it's, so that part I really, really, really like to hear, because it's just like anything else. There are, if you're teaching a skill on the football field, that's like if you were a lineman, I'm sure you did 6 point and 4 point layouts,
Hmm.
into a sled. And you do those as a defensive lineman over and over and over again until it's ingrained. It becomes second nature. So you strike the offensive lineman properly. So that's good. Now, me personally, I am a big Olympic lift guy, and I have always been, and um, and understand people's opinions, because there's more than one way to skin a cat. There really is. Now, I don't think, only in certain instances I only did cleans. In my programs, I've done the whole gamut: snatches, cleans, jerks. And I think when doing all of those, you see a much better training effect. And, we have results from force plate data and all types of stuff to show that they were beneficial. But just like you said, by focusing only on cleans and only doing cleans once a week or twice a week, I don't think you get near the training effect, from having done all three of those lifts. And, one thing, especially in the Southeastern Conference, when you have, like, especially with the offensive and defensive linemen, when those two strike one another, there is this, and I'm going to say violent, there is a violent, um, eccentric and isometric contraction that takes place when when two of those bodies collide with one another. And I think it's, and this is my thoughts on it. And one reason why those lifts are so good is that it's the same contraction that you get when you catch a heavy clean, or when you catch a heavy jerk overhead. Then you have to you've got to fix that bar over your head. And when that weight comes down on you, it's a similar contraction. And and some people use ground-based jammers, and we used them. But going back over my career and looking at the amount of time we spent doing jammers and cleans and jerks, sometimes that was a little clouded. But I know from using the Tendo on players when they were striking the sleds, because we would have them strike sleds and uh, do a lot of stuff with the tendos attached to their body, the string. I know that some of the forces that they were able to generate, we were able to duplicate while doing cleans. So, that's neither here nor there. We could talk about the benefits or not over and over and over again, but that's not the purpose of the podcast. So I do appreciate your opinion, and especially with sports like golf, swimming, tennis, and those sports, I could see even in some sports like baseball, especially baseball pitchers. I don't see any reason why a baseball pitcher or a softball pitcher. There's so many other ways to train for dynamic strength and speed strength and starting strength and all of that, having someone do a clean. So I agree uh, with your comments. I do. All right. So at this point, I would like to take a moment here to pause, and this is the first time we've done this, uh, to say a word about our friends at S2 Cognition. So if you're listening to this podcast, you definitely have a love for a good deep dive into the world of high performance. Because of that, you need to check out our friends at S2 Cognition. When it comes to how the brain affects high performance, these guys know their stuff. They've got loads of content talking with industry experts and digging into cognitive science on their S2 podcast. They also have blogs and in-depth science on the S2U page of their website, and even on their social media accounts, they have nice little bite-sized content on sports cognition education. So please do me a favor, check them out through the links in our show notes. And now back to Pat. Okay? How about that? That was smooth.
It was solid.
Yeah. So I want to know a little bit about lacrosse, field hockey, and soccer. Okay. Because I've never worked with those three sports. I've seen a lot of soccer training because, you know, every place I've worked has had soccer. So I'm familiar with soccer training enough to know what I'm looking at. But lacrosse and field hockey, I got no clue. The only thing I know about ice hockey is the Chicago Blackhawks and the Nashville Predators. So other than that, I know nothing about it. All right. So in many of these programs that I have seen, there's a big emphasis on endurance work, but not a lot. I don't see a lot of pure sprint work or true strength and power training. Okay. So in your opinion, is power training and sprint work important for sports like field hockey, soccer, and lacrosse? Number one, and can you explain?
Yep, and the answer is absolutely, for two reasons. One is the global training effect that sprinting gives you. So I've even seen sprinting used as a nervous system stimulus, so like you would use jumps or plyometrics. I've even seen it used for golfers. I haven't programmed this for golfers, but I did actually have one golfer. I have a funny story. So last summer we had a golfer stay up. He's pretty good. He wants to go pro. Awesome kid. One of my favorite kids I've ever coached with. He's actually from Zimbabwe. And somehow he found himself up in cow country in central New York playing golf for Hamilton College. Awesome kid. So he stayed up for the summer training his butt off because he wants to go pro. And he knew other sports were doing speed work. And he said, Coach, can I try that? I said, sure. Why not? Because I'd actually heard of somebody had used sprints for golfers as a nervous system stimulant. So we threw it 4 reps of 10 yards twice a week. It's just acceleration work. And he loved it. He loved doing it. He would go out there twice a week before we lift, and he would run his sprints. And he said it helped him feel better. I have zero data to back this up, but he liked it. Again, I didn't program sprints for golfers, but it illustrates the point. Yeah. The global training effect to become faster and get the whole body as a unit to produce more power. Sprinting trains that better than anything else. So max velocity sprinting about, anywhere from 25, 30-ish yards, absolutely huge training effect when it's done at maximal intent. So yes, because it will make you a more explosive and faster athlete. 2, when you look at those sports, at some point, a breakaway is going to happen. I don't mean on just a big play. You're going to have to separate. For example, soccer, you're going to make a defender miss, and you're going to have a good 10-yard window to get to a spot to take a shot, or you're going to get beat defensively, and you got to make up ground. Or lacrosse, especially when you're on offense or defense on either end of the field, it's about creating just enough space in such a short area to get a shot off or get in front so they can't take a shot. And then in both sports, it is soccer and lacrosse in particular, clearing the ball is hard. So let's say your goalie makes a stop and you got to get the ball out, especially in lacrosse. You're going to get harassed all the way down the field. So you're going to need to either make a move or almost get open like a wide receiver, get the ball from your goalie and go and get to the other side of the field and clear it so you can get a chance to your offense to take a shot. and it's a lot harder than it looks. It's almost like a full court press in basketball. Just a little bit of a separation, and you got to go. You got to be able to get the ball across midfield so you can go have an offensive possession. Very hard to do, especially when you're playing high-level lacrosse. You have to be able to separate. So the ones who can clear well, you get some space, and it's a 20, 30-yard sprint to get the ball across midfield and get it to your offense. So yeah, it's going to happen. You better be fast because at some point in those games, it's going to happen. Also, with a sport like soccer, if you actually look at the GPS data and you look at the breakdown, there's this mistaken that's a constant jog, and it's really not. It's a sprint, stop, walk. You're doing a lot more sprinting and walking than you ever will jogging in soccer if you actually look at the data. So it's kind of a misconception there. So do train your endurance because there's a huge aerobic component to these field sports. But yeah, it's speed training from the global standpoint, but it's going to happen. It's preparation for the game like anything else. I will say the one interesting thing about field hockey, the way they have to handle the ball holding over it, and one thing I didn't notice until I started actually working with field hockey, they have to keep one side of the club on the ball at all times. So they can't plant and go. They have to get around the ball and almost do like a 180 turn. It's very interesting. That's the rule of the game. So they're not going to get out into a full-on sprint as much just because of the way they have to play the ball. So it's a little different. But still, at some point, you're going to have to be in a sprint in field hockey. So yes, it is important for those reasons for those sports.
Yeah. I remember I was talking to a coach about the Moffitt Method, and he said, yeah, we don't need to worry about that for our soccer team. It's just a bunch of endurance training. What? That's not, because I've seen the GPS data from our soccer team at LSU, and they had women running 18, 19 miles per hour. They did cover a lot of ground in a match, but a lot of that is like walking and jogging, and then these explosive accelerations and, some high speeds, and then very fast decelerations, especially when they were contesting the ball. So, yeah, that's what I thought. And then, on the lacrosse side of it, and you being from upstate New York know that maybe the greatest American lacrosse player of all time was Jim Brown. Is that correct? Yeah, Syracuse University. And Jim Brown was pretty fast and powerful. So for those that didn't know that, and I learned that by playing at Syracuse and seeing the banner in the Carrier Dome. Good deal. All right, so I've got a question about buy-in. Okay, and strength and conditioning coaches and staffs can sometimes take some heat when it comes to athletes' buy-in, their effort, and their attitude when they're in the weight room. Okay. And how much of this responsibility would actually fall on the actual sport and position coaches? Or do you feel that it's primarily a strength and conditioning issue? I want to know your opinion.
My opinion on that has changed quite a bit over the years. So early on,
you've done both. You've been
yeah.
a position coach and a string coach. So I wanted to ask you that.
So early on, I think it comes down to this. If they're in the weight room, it's your job as a strength coach to make sure they're executing safely, properly, and they're doing, say, enough to get the job done. Like, you can't just let a kid stand there with their hands in their pockets. To an extent, it kind of depends on your situation. And ultimately, the culture and the attitude of any team goes back to the sport coach. Attitude reflects leadership, period. I think the buck gets passed to strength coaches. It's one of the reasons I decided to leave the field, one of many. because it's not if I have a kid who just doesn't try hard, you do what you can to reach them. And maybe they have something else going on. You know, hey, are you sleeping all right? Are you doing all well? You know, physically, mentally. You try to connect with the kid, but there are some that just do not care, and you see this sometimes at the high school level, or I would see it at Division III because it's all optional in the off season. To that end, you get kids that are absolute warriors because they know they don't have to be there, but they are. But on the other end, you got kids that are very part time. It's a glorified club sport, and they do not care. So I tried. You cannot help people that do not want help. Period. I tried. I tried connecting with them. I tried getting on them. I tried having sit downs with them. I tried telling the coaches, you cannot help kids who do not want help. And if the sport coach is not going to get on them, there is no combination of words you can put together as a strength coach to change their mind. If a kid just isn't that into their sport, that's it. Can't put lipstick on a pig. The pig doesn't like it, it doesn't work. Or can't teach a pig to sing, whatever it is. So as long as they're executing safely, especially toward the end of my run, there's always going to be, and this is a Tony Robbins concept, and it's a Pareto breakdown when you look at it. There's always going to be 25% that are absolute warriors. Come hell or high water, they're going to get after it. That middle 50% do what they need to do because they know it's important. They don't love it, but they do it because they know it's important. But there's always going to be a bottom 20-25% that just either they're slackers or they're lazy or they just don't care or they haven't had it, whatever. That bottom percentage, and it may be bigger or smaller depending on where you're at, but they're always going to be there. And at a certain point you're talking about 650 kids, refocus your energy to the ones who truly want to be there. And either the other ones will get with the program or they'll find the door on their own. And then you rock and roll with the ones that are there. But if the sport coach doesn't get on them, there is no amount of words you can put together to change that kid's attitude. So you do what you can, but it's 100% on the sport coach.
Yeah. We always tried to create an atmosphere that they wanted to be a part of. And for the most part, they did a fine job. And then there was always a couple of guys that were on the fence. And then you would have those guys that were not going to do it. And, that's when you go to the position coach. I hated going to the head coach all the time. So I'd go to the position coach, we'd sit down, have talks. And then, finally you got to go to the head coach. But we had an assistant coach, and a lot of our listeners will know this guy. His name was Charlie Harbison. And one day we were talking about a kid that we were both struggling with, because usually those same people, they don't do well in school. And I'm talking about at the elite level. When you have somebody that's playing football at Tennessee, Miami, or LSU, and they're not giving you their all, then you got issues, and it's usually the same people that aren't doing well in class, aren't doing well socially, and aren't doing well for their position coach, so you got a problem. But Charlie Harbison used to say, we were talking about this, and he would always say, you have players that get to go to practice, and they're going to always be there, and they're going to be your best players because they get to do it. They're excited about the opportunity. They love it. And then you have those guys that are going to do it because they have to, because there's coaches that are going to, and the parents and, whoever is going to make them do it, and they do it. And then there's those people, Charlie would say, Coach, they ain't never going to do it. And yeah, I wanted to get your take on that. And I'm sure it's different everywhere you go. But, if we had somebody at LSU that wasn't going to do it right, man, there was some issues there. Because and there were some guys that we missed on in recruiting, but, almost everybody that we recruited had an opportunity to play in the NFL, unless we missed in recruiting, So you at least were going to get a shot to play at the next level. So you should do your very best while you're there. But that wasn't always the case. All right. So if the opportunity presented itself and you could go back and coach at your dream school, whatever that is there anything that you would do differently this time around?
Meaning going back in time, or if like tomorrow.
Tomorrow, your dream school calls you and says, "Hey, Pat, man, we want to make you an offer," or they make you an offer that you absolutely can't refuse, and
Mhm.
you're going to go coach in college. What would you do differently or not?
Assuming I had the resources, I would do
Oh,
what I
yeah, this
could to
is your dream school. This is
then, yeah,
Syracuse or I don't know. I'm talking
it
elite level.
what would drive a lot of data. I would collect a lot of information, and I would let that drive our decisions, because at that point, it's we're going to
Evidence
do
based.
what evidence based and what our measurements tell us, not based on my opinion, not just anecdote. It's okay. What are our force plates? What are our speed? Because it's not then it's not up for discussion. It's okay. What objectively, what do we need in training, and then just reverse engineer from that and develop from there. So that would be the key thing. If I had the resources and the time, would be not let the computer coach the team, but really dive into and invest those resources and get people, assistants, and a staff who really knew that stuff way better than I did, so they could tell me, look, here's what we need to work on, here's how we improve, and target that stuff. Because otherwise you're not guessing, but we want to be surgical if we can. So that's probably the
Yeah.
biggest change I would make.
Yeah. And that's, people call that the high performance sports model or evidence based training. There's different names for it, but, so without it, you're just like, we were 25, 30 years ago where everything was based on experience, intuition, and blind luck. And, but today you can really, deep dive into the data and figure it out. And like you said, you don't let the computer coach the team by any imagination. And still, it takes some experience and intuition when you start looking at force plate data. There's in fact, so when we first got the force plate, I would sit because we had a desk set up on the weight room floor with the computer, and the players or the athletes would come to whoever was doing the testing that day, and they would test them throughout the day. And I would go sit at the computer because I didn't know what I was looking at. Tennessee Tech didn't have a force plate in 1986 when I graduated from college, so I didn't know what I was looking at. And so I kept seeing this one little data point that I'd never heard of it, and there was a lot of disparity between different guys at the same position. Some things like RSI mod or concentric rate of power development or concentric impulse or eccentric impulse. There were differences among players, but there was it was within a bandwidth of one another based on who the player was. And so this one variable, it's just there was a lot of disparity between different groups or different players. So I called the guy up and I said, "What is that?" And he goes, "Don't worry about that. That's only used in research." And then I spent the entire day trying to figure out why it would not be important for us, but a lot of people use that variable in research. And I still, never got a good answer for that. So, yeah, so good deal. I appreciate that. All right. Now, are you currently, because we're getting toward the end, are you currently reading any books that you would recommend besides the material that you have written?
Mm-hmm.
Any books?
Absolutely. And I'm going to go in a different way. I would not recommend a strength and conditioning book, although there are a ton, and you should read them. But the one thing, and I'm going to go a different direction here, that people need to understand that does not get talked about enough, is money management. People out there do not know how to handle their money. So the one book I think every functioning adult should read, it's by Dave Ramsey, and you should look him up on social media. And I'm drawing a blank on his name of his book. His Key Money Principles book. And it talks about how to handle money, how to avoid spending improperly, how to retain a lot of your money. Just basic money management and handling it it's just a basic adult skill that everybody needs to know. So Dave Ramsey is a fantastic resource. I think everybody with the intro to money management and finances needs to know, because he writes about this stuff all the time. He's been creating content, education on that kind of stuff. So that's what I would recommend is his stuff and his books. He has multiple, but the Total Money Makeover, that's what it is. So Dave Ramsey's Total Money Makeover.
I was looking it up when you,
I can't believe I drew a blank on that one.
Yeah.
So I would recommend that, hands down.
Yeah, and that's important because, I thought you were going to say The Richest Man in Babylon, because that was a book that I was told I was supposed to read when I was young. So, I'm blessed that my oldest son got a degree in finance, and, he is a financial advisor, and, does wealth management or estate planning, whatever you want to call it for people. So I was blessed with that. But, there was one thing that my wife and I learned early, that after you pay your bills, because we didn't, in fact, I did a podcast this morning with a coach, Dr. Lorenzo Guess. He is the director of strength and conditioning, or director of performance at Michigan State University, and he trains the men's basketball team. When he first started coaching as a high school coach, he had like 5 jobs, while he was coaching, to help supplement his income. And I didn't have 5 jobs, but I started 2 companies. I had a landscaping company, and I had a company that we washed windows. And there was even a time when I considered picking up aluminum cans, because you're not making a lot of money. But the thing that Jill and I always did, after we paid our bills, we paid ourselves, and we deposited money in the savings account until we got enough to invest. So the first time I went to the bank, I felt like we had enough money. We didn't have kids. I don't remember how much it was, but we went to the bank to invest some money, and the banker laughed at us and said, "I'm sorry, that's not enough." It kind of ticked me off, man. So I got serious about saving money. And, so times have changed, because my son, Clay, will start an account. He doesn't have a minimum investment amount. And to this day, I don't know why that bank was like that. So, that's awesome, man, because I've seen guys that weren't making a lot of money, and then they start making a lot of money. They start buying trucks and big fancy houses, and, they're going out to Ruth Chris to eat. And my wife and I, man, we didn't do that. I was on a $5 a week budget. So that's good, man. That's awesome. Any books on strength and conditioning that you like?
The one that kind of gave me a huge look into more than just, like, say, 3 sets of 8 on a trap bar was taking a dive down the West Side rabbit hole. So learning the West Side Book of Methods, and I did like a whole 2-year conjugate kick. That's how I got my squat over 600 pounds and all that. So the idea of it's not just maximal strength. There's multiple special strengths, and the idea you can train for those specifically, and you can do dynamic effort, and you can the specificity principle. I mean, applied to the squat, bench, and deadlift, sure, but you can take that and apply that concept to basically any biomechanical movement the body can do. So the exposure to something other than linear periodization, something other than just 3 sets of 5, 3 sets of 8, and taking a deep dive into this West Side, and then coming out the other side of knowing, okay, here's the methods and here's how you'd apply them, and not just copy and paste it blindly. But the whole West Side rabbit hole, I think, is a really good one to learn when you're several years in the field and you have a pretty good base, because it's just going to be confusing starting out. So when you have a pretty good base, take a trip down the conjugate, try it, learn it, make mistakes with it, and then understand how to apply those concepts. And I think that's when you look at the little more advanced training. What do you do in an athlete is already strong enough? What's the next step? That leaves a lot of clues of how to put it together and tap into different special strengths. So the whole West Side series opened up a lot to me.
Yeah. Any other advice for young coaches?
I will say this one's probably unique to me. If you're not on social media, get on social media right now. It's just the way the world is going. You can be just another resume in the stack, or you can be somebody that is recognized because you put out quality stuff on social media. I can't tell you how many people I've met at conferences that I know their name because I've engaged with them. You want to talk about networking? You can network with you and I connected through Twitter DMs. So if you're not on social media, Twitter, Instagram, it's such a great place to learn. I've learned more, I'd say, off social media than I have like books I've read, because there's just the access to people who have been in your situation, world-renowned experts. It's all out there. So if you're not on social media, one, for your own presence and your own living resume, but there's so much good quality learning content out there. Social media is where it's at. In 2023, got to be on there.
Good deal.
That I would say get as much applied experience as you can in different sectors. Go personal train people at the local gym. Go intern at the Power 5 place. Go work at the high school. Go work at the D3. Get as much experience as you can and find out what you really want to do. Because you might say, I want to work at LSU, until you get there and it's like, man, this looked better in my head. I thought it was something different. Or like, I would never want to be a D3 until you get there and it's like, maybe I want to do this. So expand yourself, get uncomfortable, and get on social media.
Perfect. Well, man, awesome job, man. I appreciate it. Thank you very much for doing this today. This has really been good. In fact, the Moffitt Method's had a great day today. 2 incredible podcasts. So
Awesome.
I appreciate you. All right, you can follow Coach Basil on Instagram and Twitter. I'm going to say Twitter. I keep saying Twitter, but it's really X.
I still call it Twitter.
Yeah. But check him out at P Basil Strength, and it's PBASIL Strength. This brings us to the end of today's podcast. Thank you very much for tuning in. I hope that you enjoyed this podcast as much as I did, and if so, please subscribe, leave us a review, and share it with your friends. For more information about the Moffitt Method Speed, Strength, and Conditioning Program, please visit our website, themoffittmethod.fit, or simply email us any questions that you might have to info@themoffittmethod.fit. Thank you very much again, and we'll see you again next week. Bye-bye.